Hello there, sword friends. Today I'm going to tell you about this sword right here. This is the Romance of Men Fukyo Katana, and before I get into the review, some disclaimers. One, this is a review sample. It was sent to me for free. If you think that makes me biased, you know at the start. Two, it's $200 on the website today. That might be based on a sale. I think it's a little less than it normally is. But it could be completely different depending on when you go and buy this thing and how the tariffs are sitting. It's a really weird time in the US right now. If that's where you're buying it, I don't know if $200 is going to be what you end up paying. However, that is the frame of mind I'm going to use throughout this review to judge it as a $200 sword. The other thing that you should know is that I study Japanese style swordsmanship, and I have used this one for that. I've practiced the Ido with it a bit, I have cut with it, I've done some normal things with it, and that is somewhat abnormal for me. I don't intend on breaking this one or putting it anymore through its paces. As it is, this to me stands out as a sword that somebody would get to practice in the dojo to do backyard cutting, and it needs to be sufficient to do those tasks. I'll also note that recently I've gotten a little bit of a reputation for sending broken swords off to labs and having them come back with the actual metallurgy involved. I'm not going to do that in this case, and even if I had the discretionary income to do so, I don't know that I would. And the reason is Romance of Men doesn't actually advertise the kind of steel that they're using. They say it's going to be 53 HRC, which is a very reasonable HRC to hit a hardness level. It's a little on the softer side. It means it's probably not going to hold an edge as well as some harder swords are, but it's also going to be somewhat potentially forgiving, as I believe this is a through hardened blade. I could be wrong on that. Anyway, they don't, on the website anyway, advertise the kind of steel, and folks aren't buying this more than likely because it's made out of some sort of bougie, swanky steel, so there's not a lot to really disprove here. For a $200 sword, I am going to determine or give you some impressions at the end of if I think it's worth it, but hopefully by the end of the video you have an idea of if it's worth your money or not. $200 is a budget sword though. It's not a particularly expensive sword. There are swords that are less expensive. You can buy one for 60, 70 bucks, but the less expensive ones are pretty few and far between. This is more towards the entry-level price point, certainly. Anyway, with that out of the way, I'm going to go through the bits and bobs and fits and features, then I'll do some cutting with it, and then I will give you my impressions at the end. So, bits and bobs, fits and features, the Kasha. I will point out that I like this fitting set. It's one that I've seen before. I believe I've seen it first on a Hanwei sword, but I could be wrong about that, but it reminds me of some pieces that I have seen from Hanwei. To that end, it is well cast. It has some detailing on the top, this kind of scratch pattern. Then it has some ribbing around the side. It basically just has dimension everywhere you look at it. I do make out some seams on it, which means that this casting is likely a reproduction of some other thing. It's not the best. However, for $200, this is a nice set of fittings. It's also not teeny, and it's not finger painted. It's not trashy looking. It's about as good as I think you can expect for 200 bucks. The other bit that I'm going to note is that it's a little bunchy around here. Romance of Men, I don't think has ever really put out a perfect handle. This remains an opportunity for them. However, the Kasha is not coming off. I have used this for EI. I've dropped the sword. I've cut with it. I've cut some debatably abusive things with it, and the Kasha has not loosened. It hasn't come undone, and I can't say that I noticed these ledges in the course of using the sword. So it's a cosmetic related thing more than anything else. At the same time, still an opportunity for Romance of Men to improve and to make this a really seamless, well-fit handle. They are improving, I will give them that, just not in this particular area, which in fairness, a lot of sword companies at $200 don't really do any better. That's not to say I wouldn't like to see it improve though. As I move around the knots, I will point out that they don't stand out super proud. Sometimes these knots get really bulbous and thick. They're not standing out much more than any other knot, and they also feel relatively tight. This silk feels good as well. That's another thing that I'm going to note. The knots don't move around. I can't push them, which is something that is newer for Romance of Men. When they first sent me some swords, these knots were laughably loose, and it was really very concerning if you wanted to use this to practice. This feels like it's going to stay tight for quite a while and doesn't really give me any cause for concern if you wanted to use this in a dojo. Well, you know, there might be some unsightly parts here. It feels solid, and it gives me the impression it will stay that way. I've used it some. It's gone through some temperature changes, and it still seems quite good. It is fraying a little bit. As I make out in the lights, there are little spots that are fraying. That isn't necessarily a terrible concern, but I believe this was supposed to be silk, and so it concerns me a little that silk might age a little bit. At the same time, Ito doesn't usually just straight up come undone, and if it frays and wanders a little bit, this has kind of a, I don't know, like an earthy looking scabbard, so I don't know that I would actually mind it if it started absorbing a lot more oils from my hands and really kind of had that used and lived in look. Regardless though, the Samegawa panels show some reasonable sized nodules here. This is actually a little bit of a nicer skin than I would expect on most $200 swords. I think this is luck of the draw, not something that you can necessarily hope for. I also make out the panel lines, which is kind of unfortunate. I wish I didn't. I can also make out what appear to be hishigami. I think those are kind of tucked between the little triangle bits here. At least that's what I think the indentations are that I'm making out. But I can make out the panel lines. There's just some unsightly stuff here. Ideally, you don't make out the bulges from hishigami. You don't make out the lines from the panel. That's a really tough and challenging thing to do. If I were to ask a professional to wrap this in a way that did that, it would cost more than the whole sword. So I know I'm being very demanding here, but I'm calling out all the details because some people are irritated by different things. The point is though, the ito is very tight, but I do make out some seams and lines and things like that. For a $200 sword, my personal want would be tight ito. You really can't skip on that. If it's loose, then you have to lacquer it. It doesn't feel good. It'll come undone. It'll cost you money. If it's tight but has some blemishes or cosmetic issues, you can still use it and it still feels good in your hand. And this silk does feel good. It feels like a better quality of silk than I'm typically used to feeling. I don't know why. I don't know if it's a better quality of silk or not, but it feels that way. It doesn't feel kind of as synthetic as I'm used to feeling. Not that necessarily makes a huge difference. The sageo, incidentally, does match. I think it's made of the same material and feels like a shoestring. So it doesn't feel good here, but it does feel pretty good on the actual handle itself. There's a single makugi right here. Actually, there is another one that I can make out here because I'm blind, but there are two makugi. The handle hasn't wiggled or jiggled or anything. I haven't taken it apart as of yet, but it does feel generally also pretty good in the hand. Width-wise, it's not too bulbous, it's not too thick. I like the way the knots are done. Everything is nice and tight. I really feel connected and in control of the weapon. Like I said, there are some unsightly bits, but in feeling, I think it has it where it counts. As I move up to the fuchi up here, there's some, again, overlapping ledges here, opportunity for improvement. They're not hot spots necessarily, but they're irritating and don't need to be there. Same kind of issue that I would have with the fuchi. Handle, all in all though, I think is handsome. I like the color of the green that it presents. I like how thematically it goes together. This key fret looking tsuba here is really interesting. I happen to like this overall tsuba and what it provides. You can see through it. It has some complexity to it. This is really imitating a very high-end Tsukashi style tsuba. At the same time, it's not super durable. So I have had other swords that have had this part before, and when I threw it at a tree, it deformed very, very quickly. So this is not a tsuba that's going to take a lot of glancing blows from your opponent's weapon. Not to say that that necessarily happens with tsuba or that I would trust all of them to do that, but this one in particular is one that's subject to bend. And the only reason I would say that that's important, which I haven't tested yet, is if I were to take the handle off, sometimes the handles are pretty stuck on there and you have to be a little handsy with the tsuba to get it off. This would be an easy one if you hit it in the wrong spot with a mallet to deform and bend, and those key frets are holding on in different places, so it's kind of hard to bend it back if you do bend it. That is the only concern I'd have. At the same time, it's very pretty, and for what it is, I think it's very charming. Most people don't take their swords apart. If you do, it's just another area of caution. You really have to get it on the seppa area to pound the handle off. If you need to use any percussive maintenance, that's the spot to do it. Don't be real careful not to do it on the tsuba on this one, because I know it's a little bit more on the fragile side and a little less on the forgiving putting it back kind of side. It looks a little kittywampus if you do that. Also, if you tip over and drop it, it doesn't straighten out that well either. It has like these crumple zones. So I may have abused a few of them. The point is, it's beautiful, but on the more delicate side for tsuba, and because of the intricate pattern, it doesn't come out particularly well. The other bit is the habaki over here. It's a pretty standard habaki. It has a little bit of a decoration on it, a chrysanthemum or some sort of floral pattern on it. I don't know exactly what flower it is. Tension in the sai is generally pretty good. It doesn't immediately fall out, but a good shake will push it out. When I'm training with it though, if I draw and sheath it, it's actually quite nice. It tensions quite well. It draws and sheaths relatively quietly. As a practitioner's tool, this was actually pleasant for a $200 sword. It's seldom that you get a $200 sword that does all the things that it's supposed to do. Now, there's no horn parts on the mouth of the scabbard nor on the kurigata. I don't make any out on the kojiri either. These appear to be some plastic resiny pits or painted. But it does have this very sparkly, bedazzly, earthy, tony, but blingy scabbard. I think the overall combination is actually quite handsome, and it has a texture to it that maybe you can hear in the camera. Or in the microphone. The camera picks up video. Microphone picks up audio. There we go. Some ASMR for you. It has a texture to it. It doesn't snag on my obi. It's not like sandpaper, but I do feel it. It has a little bit of grip to it. I think it's very pleasant, honestly. And generally speaking, this does everything that I need it to do. I would say that the shoestring Sugeo is not necessarily great, but this is something that you can upgrade at a later date, and I'm not really bothered. It comes with something that works, and it looks nice if you're not going to do anything else with it, but if you want a nicer Sugeo, this would be worth the extra $10 to spend and buy a different or better Sugeo. For the blade standpoint, this has a double bohi and then a kasaki on it that is in there. Those are the kind of prominent features of the blade. The polish is nothing to really write home about. It doesn't stand out. It looks like a through hardened blade, but it has like a little bit of ghosts that give me the impression maybe it's differentially hardened in some way. I'm not entirely sure. It acts like a through hardened blade though. The kasaki is more or less sanded a different direction, but tastefully so. And I'm not expecting, honestly, much more on a $200 sword. To get swords with nicer polishes, they usually are another $100 or $200 on top of this. It does have a double bohi, a feature that is not common to find in a sword at this price, but it's not necessarily going to the nines either. The way they're terminated are not particularly elegant in terms of where the bohi terminate. They're spaced a little different, they're terminated a little differently, so it's there, but less attention to detail. Honestly though, it looks cool. I'm not really bothered by it. For a $200 sword to have the bohi on it, I think adds an element of charm. Now this is also sold as a very, very sharp sword, and I can tell you that out of the box it was in fact very sharp. That's one of the defining features of it. However, mine was not as sharp as I think some of the other creators out there have experienced with the examples they got. If I look at it in the right light, I can almost like make out the edge. And so if I take a honing stone to it, it doesn't really take a lot to really keen it up and make this really zip through targets. But when it came out of the box, it wasn't obscenely, well, it was very, very sharp for most katana. But if you're doing Toyama Ryu or doing competitive tatami cutting, then you're used to maybe getting a very, very obscenely sharp edge. This one did not have quite that level, but honestly it was very insignificant amounts of effort to bring it there. It just required a couple passes with a honing stone, and then it was chef's kiss in terms of sharpness. That sharpness, however, is not super strong. So I noticed that it starts to lose that really refined level of sharpness somewhat quickly. It's easy enough to put back on. A few more passes with the honing stone, I feel like I'm back to kind of obscene, I can shave my arm kind of sharpness, but after a few mats, even, 10, 15, 20 cuts, bad cuts on relatively hard mats, some of them might have had wood cores in them as well. I lose some of that just biting hair shaving sharpness. It still stays sharp. It doesn't give the impression it's like coming apart or it's heat treated in a way that it's soft and not done correctly, but it's also loses that really fine hair popping edge after dozens of cuts or so. So it is something to be aware of if you're doing a lot of aggressive cutting with this, that this requires a little bit more maintenance than you might be used to. I think it's because it comes with a very fine edge already. That fine edge is being depleted more quickly, but that fine edge is being restored with the method that I use with basically a ceramic rod. So for whatever that's worth, that's been my experience in cutting, or rather maintaining the level of sharpness. I'll talk about moving it around a little bit now. In terms of EI, it's a really good companion. Honestly, it draws and sheathes really well. A lot of times $200 swords are really raspy, or as I'm using them, I bind the sword in a lot of different ways. This one doesn't really snag. Now, it doesn't thin out. It doesn't have some of the elegance that some of the higher end options have. But for $200, it was quiet. It drew relatively smoothly. It didn't give me any obstacles to learn over. The handle felt consistently tight, so I didn't get fatigued. In fact, I brought this to class on a day where my arms were just killing me. And I could train with this the whole class, and that's kind of saying something. I brought my Iaito as well, expecting to have to switch to a lighter sword. This was comfortable enough for me to use the entire class, which I think is a testament to the Ito being tight and all of it being comfortable, because those things start to frustrate me if I'm working on a technique, and eventually I might switch back to a different sword or my Iaito or something to work and drill a few more things. I rolled with this through an entire class, and it was quite good. I've practiced with it a number of other times in my backyard, and honestly, it's actually surprising how nice it is for the money. Is it as good as a $300 Iaito from Japan? No, not for EI anyway. Is it a competition cutter? Is it all of these other things? No, but it is a good sword. It's quiet, it sheathes well, it came relatively sharp, the ito is tight, it handles well, it's fun to move around, and nothing is coming loose or kajiggery. It's not a bad sword. And Romance of Men has really come a long way. While there are opportunities for improvement here, fundamentally, this is a good sword. It's sharp out of the box. I can do some cutting with it. It takes very little to maintain the edge. The ito is very tight. It's shaped well. And while there are some opportunities for improvement, it's really nailing the things that really, really matter, that cost a lot to fix or cause a lot of problems down the line. They're well on their way to making some of the best swords out there. I'm eager to see how they continue to learn and grow, because they have moved up by very significant steps over the last years, and it's good to see. This is I don't know, I swelled with pride a little bit, because I've seen some swords from Romance of Men that were not like this, and it's very it's a happy day for me to see them come this far. Anyway, for $200, I can tell you a little bit more about the cutting side of things too. I didn't do a huge amount of cutting, but I certainly did my fair share. A lot of bottles, things like that, and honestly, the sharpness is quite good. I cut with it not super sharp, and with it as well quite super sharp. And honestly, either way, it does a pretty solid job on the small targets that I'm using. I was able to get the base of the bottles and things like that to stay on the stand, which is happening more, so maybe I'm getting a little better, but previously has been somewhat uncommon. It has happened with a few different swords lately. This one just seemed to do pretty short work. I didn't have as much luck doing kind of zero level cuts or very, very close cuts, but so long as I took my position that I practice a lot and I deliver the cut that I'm used to delivering, I was actually able to get the base of the water bottle to stay on the stand quite a number of times, which was surprising, as well as in the thrusts and things like that. So the sword, the sharpness, its aptitude did quite well. As I mentioned, I have cut some things. I'm not great at actually hitting the record button sometimes, so some of my footage is missing, but I have cut branches, I have cut bottles, I have cut a few tatami mats. And honestly, it takes on just about anything that I throw at it. The exception being branches. Once they get past an inch and a half in diameter, I'm really swinging and I feel like I'm losing some of the edge. Not visibly. If I look at it, it's not bent or diminished in some way. But if I touch it with my thumb a little bit, I feel like I've lost that hair popping sharp. I can't just have it shore hair off of me anymore. I lose that, and that's kind of roughly the way it came, or not. It got there without very much work, but I can lose that pretty quickly. Other targets though, tatami mats, I will lose it. I want to say after cutting some bottles and some mats, I lost that as well, and then a few strops with my ceramic rod, and it seemed to come right back. So anyway, that was my experience cutting. It did a very sufficient job. For a $200 sword, this was fun to use. I felt in control. It did a good job. It made me look better at cutting, frankly, than I am. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Hopefully at this point you have enough to decide if this sword is worth your money. For $200, I think you get a lot here. In terms of my opinion, would I recommend it for $200? Yes. $200 is not a huge amount of money. The options that you have available in that price point are somewhat limited. Here, I think you get a durable sword. You get a sword that's sharp. If you're not really great at putting edges on yourself, but maybe you have some passability at stroking the sword with a rod like I do, and maintaining an edge a little bit, then this, I think, is maybe easier to maintain, easier to deal with, easier to get that initial sharpness out of the box. The ito is tight. It has a charming color. All in all, I think you really do get a fair amount. What else can you get for $200 is honestly a good question. There are a number of swords that are out there, but this has a particular blingy theme. It has nice silk. It has a double bohea, and it has an edge that's really sharp. And those, you might get some combination of them, but it's uncommon to find all three of them for $200. So I think there's a reasonable value here, and I think the delivery is overall quite good. Anyway, those are my thoughts. I want to thank the folks at Romance of Men for sending this my way. It's been fun to train with, fun to use a little bit more of a basic sword, look at the value again. If you can find one for $200, it certainly, I think it's compelling if you like what it has to offer. At the same time, I would say $200 might not be what it is because tariffs are weird. Hopefully you can find one for that. Hopefully you don't get any unfortunate surprises if they're shipped to you and all of a sudden you have a surprise bill or something to pay for. Make sure you do your due diligence and figure out what it's actually going to cost when it lands. But if it's $200, I think you're getting a pretty solid deal. Anyway, that's all I've got. Cheers, and thanks for watching.